Mr. Lewis will now turn to Mr. Carr.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. I want to take the opportunity just to begin here in thanking my colleague for bringing this important piece of legislation forward. You know, we often live and talk about the Ottawa bubble. And what that means is that there are issues here that sometimes consume a lot of our energy and our time and our focus that are disassociated with the things that people on the ground really care about. My colleague, Mr. McGregor, our colleague, received over 36,000 signatures to a petition in support of the objective of this legislation. In my constituency office, I'm told that we are getting 30 emails about every minute right now, which puts us over 10,000 in the course of the last couple of days. Now, I know that my Conservative colleagues like to refer to this as pandering to activists. I do take some exception to the demonization of activists as somehow being flawed in their pursuit of better treatment of animals. But that aside, I don't understand how it is that we can characterize the voice of tens of thousands of Canadians that have been expressed through the democratic process as simply being chalked up to some form of extreme activism. The job of a member of parliament is to reflect the views of their constituents back to folks that do business here in Ottawa. And I respect the fact that Mr. Barlow and my Conservative colleagues are, I think, genuinely doing that, reflecting concerns raised by those they represent. I'm doing the same thing, as I believe Mr. Lewis is, Mr. McGregor, and others. When I campaigned during the by-election we held in Winnipeg South Centre in June of this past year, I heard about this issue more than any other that was raised by people at the door and in my office who wanted to see action on something that mattered to them. In part, that is because my riding is not too far from Richardson International Airport in Winnipeg, where a large number, as we know, of these horses are sent for slaughter. I do also have a couple of concerns or perhaps just curiosities about rationale used by my Conservative colleagues in particular in opposition to this bill. I did hear my colleague Mr. Barlow talk about the fact that there were no rules broken, therefore why bring forward legislation. I'm not sure that the purpose of legislation is always to respond to a broken rule. Conservatives are bringing forward legislation as it pertains to a price on pollution. I'm not sure that's breaking any rule, but they brought forward legislation that they want to see bring changes to that. I'm also not really hearing Mr. Lewis talk a lot or others talk about broken rules as much as I'm talking about the core of this issue, which is that these are sentient beings that under current regulations, even if rules are not being broken, is not in line with the values that we believe we should have as Canadians. I also don't quite understand the point raised about death and always coming back to minimal numbers of deaths. Of course, assuming that the statistics are true, and I've read them, I have no reason to believe that they're not, that there's a minimal number of deaths. That's like saying, if somebody hits a dog but the dog doesn't die, we don't need to worry about it. If somebody abuses a child emotionally, but there's no physical or fatal consequence as a result of that abuse, that it's not something that we should be talking about. So the point I'm simply raising is that just because the horses aren't dying in transport does not justify that the provisions currently in place are good. I know that my Conservative colleagues, much like I think many of us, like to be rooted in evidence, and the evidence certainly suggests Mr. Lewis, that this is a priority for many Canadians. And I don't depreciate the significant concern that is coming from some folks that my colleagues represent, but that does not mean that there aren't tens of thousands or millions of people across the country who feel differently. And I think sometimes that's being left out of the conversation. I do note that in a comment that was made by our colleague from Dauphin, Swan River, Neepawa during debate on this not too long ago, that he accused the Liberals as attempting to score cheap political points on the basis of this legislation. With the 30 seconds I have left, Mr. Lewis, I think it's 30 seconds, 45 maybe, can you tell us why you brought this bill forward and why you believe if you do, that the feedback you've received and that we've received from tens of thousands of Canadians is legitimate? Thank you.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to answer. And Winnipeg Humane Society has been a strong advocate for banning this practice. And I have to say thank you because your name comes up when we have those conversations as someone who's behind this. So they're lucky to have you, and I appreciate that. The vast majority of Canadians in all provinces, all political stripes, they want to see this practice. Just recently heard from someone in Foothills, Alberta, Mr. Barlow's own riding, who wants to ban this practice. So this is not some niche issue. This is not urban versus rural. This is not about going against agriculture. This is about banning a practice that's already been banned in other countries, and more countries are working toward this. It's about banning a cruel practice of shipping horses live by plane across the world to be eaten as a delicacy. And I take offense by the member's description of being called niche. This is not niche. This is compassionate. This is Canadian. And we're getting people from all across the country asking us to stand up and do the right thing. And I think that's what we're doing.
Thanks, Mr. Lewis. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Carr. Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Now